Have you received blowback from, his Twitter army?
Of course, yeah.
Rachel Crooks, one of U.S. President Donald Trump's accusers, talking about what happened after she went public. The online anonymity of social media creating the perfect cover, it seems, for some people to troll at will.
I mean, definitely, social media is harsh.
And her experience is far from rare. The Neiman Lab at Harvard University charts where the news is headed in the internet age.
We're looking at making tools for journalists to do their jobs better.
This month, it published its predictions for journalism in 2018, including a worrying prediction that it's only going to get tougher for journalists to convince people to go on the record. Ruth Palmer wrote that article and a new book called Becoming the News: How Ordinary People Respond to the Media Spotlight. So, Ruth, let's begin there. Why do you think it's going to be tougher for journalists such as myself to convince people to come forward?
Well, I've been researching for the last 10 years people's experiences, speaking to reporters for many different kinds of stories. And what I've continually found is that when those stories are sensitive or controversial, of course, potential sources really weigh the pros and cons. And online, both the pros and the cons really are magnified, but especially the cons. And there are two main reasons for that. The first is that news stories, especially those published by prominent news outlets that have large circulations, they perform very well in online searches. So what that means for people who agree to be named in news articles is that those articles will show up when you Google their names, and in some cases really completely reshape their search results. So they need to take that into account, and that's an important thing as we continually Google people more. And the second reason is cyber harassment, which is, of course, extremely prevalent right now. And studies are finding that minorities and women in particular get very harsh cyber feedback when they speak out about things, and they're more likely to self-censor as a result of it.
And yet it's interesting because you contrast that with what we see happening right now in the Me Too movement, for instance. We do see women coming forward. Why are they still feeling comfortable doing that against what you're talking about?
I think it's very helpful to women to see other women coming forward. But one of the things that they're likely to also see is a lot of cyber repercussions that those women are facing. So you have to think that any news story now has the potential to go viral, but especially right now, people are increasingly consuming news on social media. And the types of news stories that get a lot of play on social media, lots of commentary, lots of sharing, are the stories that people feel very strongly about. So increasingly that can be a concern, is that they can get a lot of direct feedback via social media, phone calls, calls to work, this kind of thing. So that's, a worrying trend.
So, before we leave it at that point, what can we say to people that will help them understand that there's still some value here in coming forward, that it's not just saying, forget it, it's not worth the risk?
Absolutely. That's a wonderful question. There are a couple of things, practical things that reporters can do to help minimize risks for subjects. One is to have these conversations so that they're prepared, right? If they're prepared for cyber blowback, they feel like they're more in control of the situation, and that's very helpful. Reporters can also advise potential sources to make it just a little bit harder to identify them online and to contact them directly. So they can use slightly different names on social media from the names that they're giving reporters, for example. Conceal certain identifying things about themselves on social media, so their place of work, this kind of thing, can make it a little bit harder for trolls to get at them easily. And the third thing, which is probably the most important, is that journalists can emphasize to sources the public good of what they do when they come forward and tell stories about systematic patterns of abuse. I have found that that is an extremely convincing incentive for people because it's true. The possibility that telling a story, even a painful story, could ease others' pain or prevent them from enduring something similar is an extremely persuasive argument that journalists can make.
Ruth, thanks for this.
My pleasure.